There's something hauntingly beautiful about the way ancient rituals echo through time, whispers of a world where the sacred and the mysterious intertwined in ways we can barely fathom today. Picture this: under a blood-red moon, priests chant in tongues long forgotten, their voices rising to the stars as they call upon forces beyond human understanding. Or imagine a lone shaman deep in the Amazon, dancing with fire to commune with spirits unseen. These aren't just stories, they're fragments of a reality where every ritual held the weight of life, death, and the cosmos itself. And that's exactly what we're about to uncover: 30 of the most enigmatic sacred practices from across the ages, each one a window into the sublime and the surreal. From the shadowy temples of Mesopotamia to the mist-shrouded peaks of the Andes, humanity has always sought to bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine. Some of these rituals were acts of devotion, like the celestial ceremonies where entire civilizations aligned their cities with the movements of the stars. Others were far darker: blood sacrifices meant to appease vengeful gods, or secret rites performed in hidden chambers, their true purpose lost to time. But here's the thing: every single one of them, no matter how strange or unsettling, reveals something profound about who we are. They're not just relics of the past, they're mirrors reflecting our deepest fears, hopes, and the unshakable belief that there's more to this world than meets the eye. So why do these rituals still captivate us? Maybe it's because they remind us that mystery isn't just a thing of the past. It's alive in every unanswered question, every legend passed down through generations. And over the course of this journey, we'll unravel the secrets behind 30 of these sacred acts, from the awe-inspiring to the chilling. You'll witness rituals that defied logic, ceremonies that shaped empires, and traditions so powerful they've endured for millennia. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an invitation to step into the unknown, to feel the pulse of something ancient and extraordinary, ready to begin. The past is waiting, and it's far stranger than you ever imagined. The Aztecs believed the very fate of the universe rested on their ability to keep the sun god Huitzilopochtli nourished, and his hunger demanded nothing less than human blood. At the heart of their empire, towering pyramids like the Templo Maya in Tenochtitlan served as stages for ceremonies so visceral they defy modern imagination. Victims, often prisoners of war or volunteers seeking divine honor, would ascend the temple steps under the gaze of thousands. Priests clad in elaborate ritual garb would then perform the act itself. A swift cut to the chest, the offering of a still beating heart to the gods, the body cast down the pyramid's steep sides. To outsiders, it's easy to see only the brutality, but for the Aztecs, this was a sacred exchange, life given to sustain life itself. Their cosmology painted a universe in constant peril, where the sun's daily journey across the sky was a battle against darkness. Without sacrifice, they feared the sun would fail, plunging the world into eternal night. The selection of victims wasn't random. Warriors captured in battle were prized for their strength, embodying the energy the gods required. Even the timing was precise, aligning with celestial events like equinoxes, when the boundary between worlds was thinnest. The act wasn't just about death, it was a cosmic renewal, a pact between humanity and the divine. Archaeological evidence reveals just how central these rituals were. Temples were rebuilt in layers, each new construction sanctified with offerings. Artifacts show depictions of gods clutching human hearts, and mass graves hint at the scale of these ceremonies during times of crisis. Yet what's most haunting isn't the violence, it's the conviction behind it. These weren't acts of mindless cruelty, but desperate acts of devotion by a civilization that truly believed they held the stars in place. That's the paradox of Aztec sacrifice, a practice both horrifying and deeply reverent, reminding us how far humanity will go when faced with the unknown. Deep in the heart of ancient Greece, hidden beneath the veil of secrecy for nearly 2,000 years, lay the Eleusinian mysteries. a ritual so profound that those who experienced it swore never to reveal its secrets, even on pain of death. Unlike the public spectacles of Aztec sacrifice, these rites unfolded in hushed darkness, accessible only to initiates who had journeyed to the sacred city of Eleusis. At their core, the mysteries revolved around the myth of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and her daughter Persephone, whose abduction by Hades plunged the world into winter until her partial return each spring. But this wasn't just a retelling of myth. It was a transformative experience, a journey into the divine that promised something extraordinary, a glimpse beyond death itself. What made these rituals so powerful was their unparalleled secrecy. Unlike other religious ceremonies in the ancient world, the Eleusinian mysteries were open only to those who swore a binding oath of silence. Historians still debate the exact details, but we know initiates underwent days of purification, fasting, and symbolic trials before entering the telesterion, a vast hall where the climax of the rites occurred. Some accounts suggest participants drank kykeon, a barley-based brew potentially laced with ergot, a fungus with hallucinogenic properties. Imagine the scene: flickering torchlight, chanting priests, and the initiates perhaps under the influence of this sacred drink, experiencing visions so vivid they believed they'd touched the divine. The mysteries endure as one of history's most tantalizing enigmas precisely because of their silence. Famous figures like Plato and Cicero were initiates, yet they left only vague hints about what transpired. Cicero claimed the rites taught humanity not only how to live joyfully but also how to die with hope. What could they have witnessed? Some scholars speculate about dramatizations of Persephone's descent into the underworld, while others suggest psychedelic revelations that dissolve the fear of mortality. The truth may never be fully uncovered. The sanctuary at Eleusis was destroyed by Christian zealots in the 4th century, and the secrets died with the last initiates. Yet the legacy of the Eleusinian mysteries lingers, not just in their mystery but in their universal resonance. They tapped into something primal, the human longing to understand death and the promise of renewal. Unlike the Aztec sacrifices, which sought to control cosmic forces, these rites offered personal transcendence, a private pact between mortals and the divine. That's why, even now, they captivate us, not as relics of superstition, but as a testament to the timeless quest for meaning in the face of life's greatest unknowns. For the Vikings, the line between the mortal world and the divine was never just a boundary, it was a bridge crossed through blood, fire, and solemn reverence. Their blót ceremonies were far more than simple sacrifices. They were the heartbeat of Norse spirituality, a way to commune with gods who demanded both respect and reciprocity. Picture this: a snow-dusted grove in Scandinavia, the air thick with the scent of burning pine and iron. A chosen animal, perhaps a stallion dedicated to Odin or a boar sacred to Freya, is led forward, its fate sealed not by cruelty but by sacred duty. The act itself was swift, ritualistic, with every drop of blood collected in bowls, splashed onto idols, or sprinkled over the gathered crowd to seal their bond with the gods. But the blót wasn't just about death, it was about sustenance for both the divine and the mortal. After the offering came the feast, where the meat of the sacrificed animal was cooked and shared among the community, a tangible reminder that the gods' favor was not abstract but woven into the very fabric of survival. Even the act of eating was laced with meaning. Toasts were raised to Odin for wisdom, to Thor for protection, to Freya for abundance, each sip of mead sealing a pact between the people and the powers they relied upon. What made these rituals truly fascinating was their connection to the Norse understanding of fate. The Vikings didn't see destiny as a fixed path, but as a tapestry being woven by the Norns, the shadowy weavers of cosmic threads. The blót was a way to align oneself with that grand design, to ensure luck in battle, fertility in fields, or safe passage across storm-racked seas. Divination often followed the sacrifice, with priests reading omens in the entrails or casting runes to interpret the god's will. A favorable sign might mean a chieftain would launch a raid. An ill omen could delay a voyage for weeks. Archaeological finds like the remnants of ceremonial feasting halls or the so-called blood eagle carvings hint at how deeply these rituals were embedded in Viking life. But perhaps the most telling evidence comes from their own sagas, where blots appear as pivotal moments, turning the tide of wars or averting famines. In one account, a king postpones a crucial battle until after the seasonal blot, fearing the gods' displeasure more than any enemy. Yet beneath the violence and grandeur lay a profound philosophy, the idea that humans and gods were bound in a cycle of mutual need. The gods required offerings to maintain their strength against cosmic threats like the giants, while mortals sought their favor to navigate a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. That's the paradox of the blot, a ceremony both brutal and deeply intimate, where the divine wasn't distant but as close as the smell of blood on the wind or the warmth of shared meat in midwinter. It reminds us that for the Vikings, the sacred wasn't separate from the everyday, it was the thread that held their world together. High atop the windswept hills of ancient Britain, where the gnarled limbs of oak trees stretched toward the heavens like the arms of giants, the Druids performed rituals so sacred that even speaking of them was forbidden to outsiders. These weren't mere ceremonies, they were acts of communion with a world where every leaf, every stone pulsed with hidden power. At the center of their mysteries stood the oak, revered as the tree of life, its roots digging deep into the underworld, its branches brushing the realm of the gods. But it wasn't the oak alone that held their fascination. Tangled among its boughs, gleaming like emerald against the bark, grew mistletoe, a plant so potent the Druids believed it could cure ailments, ward off evil, and even open doors to other worlds. The gathering of mistletoe was no casual task. According to Roman accounts, Druid priests clad in white robes would wait for the 6th night of the new moon, when the plant was said to be at its most powerful. Then, with a sickle forged of gold, a metal believed to carry divine energy, they would carefully cut the mistletoe, ensuring it never touched the ground lest its magic seep away. The ritual was precise, almost surgical. A cloth would be held beneath to catch the falling sprigs, while nearby, 2 white bulls stood ready for sacrifice, their purity mirroring the sanctity of the moment. But why mistletoe? To modern eyes, it's a festive decoration, but to the Celts, it symbolized something far deeper. Growing neither from the earth nor entirely from the tree, it existed in between, a bridge between worlds, much like the Druids themselves. Its berries, pearlescent and sticky, were thought to hold the essence of fertility and vitality, while its ability to thrive in winter made it a beacon of hope amid darkness. Some scholars suggest the plant's association with healing might have roots in actual medicinal properties. Mistletoe extracts were later used in folk remedies across Europe. The oak, too, was more than just a backdrop. These towering beings were considered guardians of wisdom, their acorns a symbol of potential, their wood used to kindle the eternal fires of Druidic sanctuaries. Sacred groves, known as nemetons, served as open-air temples where rituals unfolded beneath the dappled light of the canopy. Here, the Druids, part priests, part scholars, studied the movements of stars, the patterns of bird flight, the whispers of the wind, compiling knowledge they guarded fiercely. Yet much of what we know comes through the lens of their conquerors. The Romans, who crushed Druidic resistance on the island of Anglesey, wrote of their practices with a mix of fascination and disdain. Caesar claimed they performed human sacrifice, though some historians argue this was propaganda to justify Rome's brutal campaigns. What's undeniable is that the Druids' oral tradition, their songs, laws, and cosmologies vanished with them, leaving only fragments etched in stone or hinted at in medieval Irish and Welsh texts. That loss makes the surviving glimpses all the more haunting. Imagine a world where the line between the physical and spiritual was porous, where a plant snipped at the right moment could change fates, where the rustle of oak leaves carried messages from the gods. The Druids' rites weren't just superstition, they were a sophisticated understanding of nature's rhythms, a reminder that the sacred wasn't confined to temples but thrived in the wild, untamed places. Even now, when we hang mistletoe at midwinter or marvel at an ancient oak, we're brushing against the echoes of their vanished world, a world where magic was as real as the soil beneath their feet. In the thin air of the Himalayas, where the earth meets the sky in a jagged line of snow and stone, Tibetan Buddhists perform one of the most striking rituals of all, the sky burial or jeta. At first glance, it seems almost unthinkable, a body carefully dismembered by Rojyapas or body breakers, then left atop a sacred rock for vultures to consume. But this practice is far from macabre. It's a profound act of compassion, a final offering that embodies the very essence of Vajrayana Buddhist teachings. The soul has already departed, what remains is merely an empty vessel, and to return it to the cycle of life in the most direct way possible is considered the ultimate act of generosity. The reasons behind sky burial are as layered as the mountains themselves. In Tibet's unforgiving terrain, where the ground is often frozen solid and timber is scarce, traditional burial or cremation isn't just impractical, it's nearly impossible for many. The ecological harmony of the ritual is striking. Vultures, revered as destinies or celestial beings, complete the cycle swiftly and cleanly, leaving no trace. There's no waste, no pollution, just the quiet efficiency of nature, but the spiritual significance cuts even deeper. In Buddhism, the body is seen as a temporary shell, an illusion that binds us to worldly attachment. By offering it freely to the birds, the deceased makes a final gesture of detachment, a release from the ego's grasp. The ritual itself is meticulous. After death, the body is wrapped in white cloth and kept for several days while monks chant prayers to guide the soul through the bardo, the intermediate state between lives. Then, before dawn, the Rojyapa carries the body to a designated sky burial site, often near a monastery. Using ritual knives, they dismantle the corpse with precision, bones crushed and mixed with barley flour, flesh laid bare, all to ensure nothing is wasted. The call of the vultures is said to be auspicious. Their swift arrival signals the soul's acceptance by the heavens. Families don't mourn as outsiders might expect. Instead, they find solace in knowing their loved one's body has become a gift, a final act of merit in a lifetime of striving toward enlightenment. What's most remarkable is how sky burial challenges our deepest taboos. In the West, death is often sanitized, hidden away, but here it's confronted openly, woven into the fabric of daily life. Monasteries sometimes keep photographs of sky burials not as shock value, but as teaching tools, reminders of impermanence, of the body's true purpose. The practice has even sparked modern debates. As vulture populations decline due to poisoning and habitat loss, some Tibetan communities now face the unthinkable prospect of losing a ritual that has sustained their spiritual and ecological balance for centuries. Yet for those who practice it, sky burial remains the purest expression of Buddhist ideals. No monuments, no possessions, just the wind and wings carrying what was never truly ours into the vast open sky. It's a ritual that doesn't just confront death, it transforms it into an act of liberation, a final lesson in letting go. The thunderous echo of a rubber ball striking stone walls would send shivers through the crowds gathered in the grand plazas of ancient Maya cities. This wasn't just a game, it was a matter of life and death, a ritual so charged with cosmic significance that the outcome could determine the fate of entire kingdoms. The Maya ball game, known as pits, was played on long, narrow courts flanked by towering walls, their sloped surfaces etched with glyphs depicting gods and serpents. To the uninitiated, it might resemble a brutal sport, players using hips and elbows to keep a heavy ball in motion. But every bounce of that ball carried echoes of the Popol Vuh, the Maya creation story, where the hero twins descended into the underworld to challenge the lords of death in a game of destiny. What made Pit so much more than a simple competition was its sacred stakes. Some scholars argue that losing teams, or in certain city-states, the victorious ones faced ritual sacrifice, their blood spilled to honor the gods. The ball court itself was a liminal space, a mirror of the mythic underworld where the hero twins outwitted the gods of decay. The stone rings mounted high on the walls weren't just goals, they were portals, and scoring a goal was akin to passing through the veil between worlds. Imagine the pressure on those players. Every move they made wasn't just for glory, but for the survival of their people. The ball, often carved with skulls or inscribed with celestial symbols, represented the sun's perilous journey through the night and the players. They were the ones keeping it in motion, ensuring dawn would come again. Archaeologists have unearthed chilling clues about the game's darker side. At Chichen Itza, the colossal ball court stretches nearly as long as a modern football field, its walls adorned with reliefs showing decapitated players, their necks sprouting serpents, a symbol of rebirth. In one particularly grim depiction, the winning captain holds the severed head of his opponent, whose body kneels before him, blood transforming into vines. This wasn't mere violence, it was alchemy. The Maya saw blood as the ultimate offering, a sacred currency that nourished the gods and maintained the balance of the cosmos. To die on the ball court wasn't a tragedy, it was transcendence, a direct passage to the divine. But here's the twist, not all ball games ended in sacrifice. Some were diplomatic tools, a way to settle disputes between feuding city-states without full-scale war. Others were theatrical reenactments of the hero twins myth, performed during festivals to reaffirm the people's connection to their gods. The ball game was flexible, its meaning shifting with context, yet always rooted in that primal idea, the struggle between order and chaos, life and death. The rubber of the ball, harvested from sacred trees, held spiritual resonance. Its bounce mirrored the heartbeat of the earth itself. Today, the silence of those abandoned courts is deceptive. Run your fingers along the weathered carvings, and you can almost hear the roar of the crowd, the frantic scuffle of players, the solemn chants of priests waiting to perform their grim duty. The Maya ball game wasn't just a ritual, it was a microcosm of their universe where every pass, every goal, every drop of blood was a thread in the fabric of existence. To understand it is to step into a world where sport and sacrament were inseparable, where the line between winner and martyr blurred, and where the gods always had the final say. High above the Gulf of Corinth, where the slopes of Mount Parnassus shimmered with olive groves, the temple of Apollo at Delphi hummed with a power that drew kings and beggars alike. At its heart sat the Pythia, the oracle whose whispers could launch wars or spare empires. But this was no ordinary prophecy, it was a ritual drenched in otherworldly fumes, where the divine spoke through the convulsions of a mortal woman. Before each session, the Pythia would descend into the temple's inner sanctum, a chamber built over a fissure in the earth. There, she'd inhale vapors rising from the stone gases modern scientists now believe were ethylene, a sweet-smelling compound with potent psychoactive effects. As the fumes coiled through her lungs, her body would tremble, her voice twisting into guttural cries. To those who watched, it wasn't madness, it was Apollo himself seizing her tongue. The prophecies that spilled forth were anything but straightforward. The Pythia spoke in riddles, her words slippery as river eels. When King Croesus of Lydia asked if he should wage war on Persia, she replied that a great empire would fall. He assumed she meant his enemies until his own kingdom crumbled. Ambiguity was the oracle's shield. It allowed the priests of Delphi to interpret responses in ways that preserved their influence. And what influence it was! City-states sent lavish gifts to secure the Pythia's favor, turning Delphi into a treasure house of gold and art. Before major decisions colonizing new lands, rewriting laws, even sentencing philosophers to death, leaders would brave treacherous journeys to seek her counsel. But the true genius of Delphi lay in its duality. The Pythia's trance wasn't just about divine possession. it was theater, chemistry, and geopolitics woven into one. Recent excavations found traces of ethylene in the temple's springs, confirming ancient accounts of sacred pneuma rising from the ground. The priests likely understood the gas's effects, carefully regulating the Pythia's exposure to avoid fatal overdoses. Between sessions, she'd purify herself with Castalian spring water and chew laurel leaves sacred to Apollo, another layer of ritual that blurred the line between sacrament and stagecraft. What's most fascinating isn't just how the oracle worked, but why people believed. In a world without satellites or science, Delphi offered something irresistible, certainty or the illusion of it. Even when the Pythia's prophecies failed, blame fell on human misinterpretation, never the god. And that's the lingering mystery of Delphi, not whether the trances were real, but how a woman's shuddering words steeped in hallucinogenic vapors shaped the fate of the ancient world. The temple is rubble now, the sacred spring a trickle, but the allure of answers from the unseen that still trembles in the air. On the banks of the Ganges, where the scent of funeral pyres hangs thick in the air, the Aghori ascetics perform rituals that defy every societal taboo. These aren't just holy men, they are the ultimate iconoclasts, smashing boundaries between purity and filth, life and death, the sacred and the profane. Picture a figure clad in nothing but ashes, his matted hair coiled like serpents, seated cross-legged on a rotting corpse. In his hands, a human skull cups river water as he drinks without flinching. To outsiders, this is grotesque. To the Aghori, it's the highest form of enlightenment. Their practices stem from tantric philosophy's most radical edge, the belief that liberation comes not by rejecting the world's horrors but by embracing them utterly. While mainstream Hinduism emphasizes purity and avoidance of pollution, the Aghori seek out what others flee: cremation grounds, bodily waste, even cannibalism. They eat scraps of flesh from funeral pyres not for sustenance but as meditation. By confronting the ultimate taboos, they shatter the illusion of duality, the idea that some things are sacred and others profane. To them, everything is divine, even decay. But why such extremes? The Aghori trace their lineage to the Kapalika tradition, medieval ascetics who worshipped Shiva in his most fearsome aspect, the destroyer who wears a garland of skulls. Modern Aghoris follow the same path, believing that only by facing death head-on can one conquer the fear that binds the soul to endless rebirth. Their rituals are alchemical, transforming revulsion into reverence, terror into transcendence. When they smear their bodies with ashes from the pyre, it's a reminder that all flesh returns to dust. When they meditate on corpses, they're staring into the mirror of their own mortality. Society has always feared them. Banished to cremation grounds, labeled madmen or monsters, the Aghori occupy a space akin to medieval European lepers, both shunned and secretly revered. Pilgrims might spurn them by daylight but seek their blessings under cover of darkness, believing their curses and cures hold supernatural power. Some Aghoris lean into this infamy, brandishing bones like scepters. Others retreat into silence, their eyes holding depths few dare to fathom. Yet beneath the shock value lies a piercing wisdom. The Aghori don't revel in grotesquerie for its own sake. They use it as a scalpel to dissect illusion. In a world obsessed with sanitizing death, they force a reckoning with its raw truth. Their rituals ask a question that unsettles even the most open-minded. What if enlightenment isn't found in light alone, but in the shadows we refuse to face? The answer might lie in the hollow of a skull, or the chill of the Ganges at midnight, where the Aghori wait, not to horrify but to awaken. Bare feet press into glowing embers, sending up showers of sparks into the crisp mountain air. This is no daredevil stunt. It's the heart of Japan's Fuji firewalking festival, a centuries-old Shinto ritual where faith isn't just professed but tested in the most visceral way imaginable. Every summer, pilgrims gather at the base of Mount Fuji, their robes fluttering in the wind as priests chant prayers to the mountain's fiery kami or spirit. The ritual, called Hiwatari, isn't about recklessness, it's about surrender. Participants spend days purifying themselves through fasting, meditation, and icy waterfall ceremonies, stripping away fear until only devotion remains. Then, with a collective shout of I, they step onto the searing path, not as victims of the flames but as partners in a sacred dance. Mount Fuji looms over it all, not just as a backdrop but as the spiritual fulcrum of the ceremony. To the Shinto faithful, Fuji isn't merely a volcano. It's a living bridge between earth and heaven, a place where the divine brushes against the mortal world. Ancient texts describe it as the axis mundi, the world's central pillar, and the firewalking ritual echoes this belief. The embers symbolize Fuji's volcanic might, but also its benevolence. By walking unharmed, devotees prove the mountain's protection. It's a paradox. The same force that could destroy them is also their shield. The science behind firewalking is fascinating in its own right. Dry wood coals, though searing hot, conduct heat poorly, meaning quick, deliberate steps minimize burns. But to reduce Hiwatari to mere physics misses the point entirely. What's truly transformative isn't the physical act but the mental leap, the moment doubt gives way to trust. Witnesses describe participants emerging with faces alight, not with pain but euphoria, as if the flames have seared away more than just impurities. Some claim chronic illnesses vanish, others speak of visions, a fleeting glimpse of the kami's presence in the shimmering heat. Historically, the festival was tied to the Yamabushi, mountain ascetics who scaled Fuji's slopes in search of enlightenment. Their trials, extreme cold, thin air, jagged terrain, mirrored the firewalk's crucible. Both were about confronting the limits of the body to expand the spirit. Even today, the festival draws modern seekers, from salarymen to artists, all hungry for something beyond the sterile predictability of daily life. Yet the ritual's power lies in its inclusivity. Unlike the secretive Eleusinian mysteries or the brutal Maya ballgame, Hiwatari welcomes all who come with sincerity. Children, elders, even curious foreigners, all may walk if their hearts are pure. That's the genius of the tradition. It democratizes the sacred, offering transcendence not through exclusion but through shared ordeal. As the last embers fade and the scent of charred wood mingles with incense, what lingers isn't the spectacle of fire, but the quiet certainty that for one fleeting moment, the mountain itself held its breath. The moment a pharaoh's mummy was laid to rest in its gilded sarcophagus, the most critical ritual of all began, not to honor the dead but to awaken them. The Egyptian opening of the mouth ceremony was no mere funeral rite. It was a metaphysical surgery, a delicate operation to restore the senses of the deceased so they could breathe, speak, and eat in the afterlife. Picture this: priests clad in leopard skins circling the mummy, their ritual blades adzes of meteoritic iron, hooks of obsidian hovering just above its linen-wrapped face. With each precise gesture, they chanted spells from the Book of the Dead, their voices echoing through the tomb's shadowed chambers. The tools never actually touched the body. Their power wasn't in physical contact, but in symbolism, an act of spiritual restoration so potent it blurred the line between magic and medicine. At the heart of the ritual lay a startling belief: death wasn't the end of consciousness, but a transformation into another form of existence. Without the opening of the mouth, the soul would remain trapped in a lifeless shell, starving and mute for eternity. The ceremony's steps were meticulously codified. First, the priest would purify the mummy with natron and incense, driving away corruption. Then came the adze, its curved edge mimicking the constellation of Orion's belt associated with Osiris, lord of the afterlife, as it opened the mouth and eyes. Next, a forked instrument touched the lips, symbolically releasing the bonds of death. Finally, offerings of bread, beer, and ox meat were presented, not as tributes but as vital sustenance now that the deceased could consume them spiritually. Artifacts from tombs reveal just how deeply this ritual permeated Egyptian thought. Funerary masks often feature slightly parted lips, a silent testament to the ceremony's success. Some tombs included miniature tool sets, tiny adzes and hooks buried alongside the dead, perhaps as backups in case the earthly priests faltered. Even the famed golden mask of Tutankhamun bears traces of this belief. His delicate mouth is subtly shaped as if mid-utterance, forever poised to speak in the court of Osiris. But the ceremony's true genius lay in its connection to broader cosmology. Spells from the Book of the Dead describe the mouth opening as part of a grander journey, where the soul navigates the duat, the perilous underworld, using restored senses to answer the gods' riddles and evade demons. One spell implores, "May my mouth be given to me that I may speak with it before the greater need." Without it, the soul couldn't plead its case at the final judgment, where the heart was weighed against the feather of Maat. Modern excavations have uncovered surprises that deepen the mystery. At Saqqara, archaeologists found a cache of ceremonial blades still stained with resin, evidence that real tools were used alongside symbolic gestures. In Thebes, a priest's manual detailed variations of the ritual for different social classes, proving even commoners could access this divine rebirth, albeit with simpler rites. What emerges isn't just a funerary practice, but a democratization of immortality. The pharaohs may have had gilded adzes, but a farmer's son could still hope for his mouth to be opened with copper, his name remembered by a single carved offering table. The legacy of this ritual lingers in the quietest corners of Egyptology. When Howard Carter unsealed Tutankhamun's tomb, the boy king's mouth, though dry with millennia, seemed almost ready to whisper. That's the haunting beauty of the opening of the mouth. It wasn't just about preparing for death, but insisting on life beyond it. In a civilization that measured time in dynasties and eternity in stone, this rite was the ultimate act of defiance, a refusal to let silence be the end. Across the frozen taiga of Siberia, where the northern lights dance like celestial serpents, the Tungusic shamans performed rituals that didn't just honor the spirits, they rode them like steeds. Clad in heavy robes studded with iron charms to ward off malevolent entities, these spiritual travelers would begin their journeys with a steady, hypnotic beat. The drum, carved from reindeer hide stretched over sacred larch wood, was far more than an instrument, it was a vessel. Each rhythmic strike mimicked the heartbeat of the earth, a pulse that carried the shaman's consciousness beyond the confines of the body, into realms where time twisted like smoke and the dead spoke as clearly as the living. What set these spirit journeys apart was their structured cosmology. The Tungusic worldview divided existence into three tiers: the upper world of benevolent gods and celestial beings, the middle world of humans and nature spirits, and the lower world, a shadowy place of ancestors and healing powers, but also of danger. The shaman's role was to navigate these layers with precision, acting as both cartographer and diplomat for the unseen. To reach the upper world, they might visualize climbing the world tree, its branches vanishing into the stars. For the lower world, the drum's tempo would slow, guiding them downward through caves or the roots of that same tree where the air was thick with whispers. But the journey wasn't undertaken lightly. Preparation involved days of fasting and purification, sometimes aided by the fly agaric mushroom, a vivid red and white fungus with potent psychoactive properties. Consumed, or even reindeer urine, which filtered its toxins while retaining its effects, the mushroom's compounds induced visions that blurred the line between hallucination and revelation. Yet the shaman wasn't merely a passive traveler. They were trained to harness these altered states, to sift visions for truth amidst the chaos. A successful journey might reveal the cause of a village sickness, a displeased water spirit demanding offerings, or retrieve a lost soul fragment from the lower world, restoring balance to a patient wasting away from spiritual malaise. Archaeological finds from the region hint at how deeply these practices were woven into daily life. Burials reveal shamanic staffs topped with iron birds, symbols of the ability to soar between worlds. Petroglyphs show figures with antlered headdresses mid-dance, their bodies arched as if straining against unseen currents. Even the language of the Tungusic peoples reflects this duality, The word shaman itself comes from their root term for one who knows, a person who moves through darkness not with fear but with purpose. Perhaps most striking was the ritual's physical toll. Witnesses described shamans collapsing into trances so deep their pulses grew faint, their breath shallow, as if the body itself were a husk abandoned for the journey. Returning wasn't guaranteed. Some spoke of battles with hostile spirits, of trickster entities that mimicked loved ones to lure the shaman astray. That's why the community's role was vital. Their songs, their drumming created a lifeline, a thread of sound to guide the traveler home. In a world that often dismisses altered states as mere intoxication, the Tungusic shamans offer a different perspective. That ecstasy and insight aren't opposites but partners. Their drumming wasn't an escape, it was a bridge, a way to touch truths opaque to ordinary sight. When the last echoes faded and the shaman's eyes fluttered open, what they brought back wasn't just a story, but medicine, prophecy, a piece of the invisible world made plain. And in that moment, the boundary between the human and the divine didn't just blur, it vanished altogether. The fishermen of New Ireland didn't cast nets or lines, they cast songs. Beneath the turquoise waters off Papua New Guinea's coast, the Polynesian shark callers practiced a ritual so precise it blurred the line between fishing and communion. These men, known as Ika, would stand in slender canoes at dawn, their voices rising in melodies passed down through generations. The chants weren't mere calls, they were negotiations, a sacred contract between human and predator. As the last notes hung in the salt-laced air, the ocean's surface would ripple not with fear but recognition. Shadows emerged from the deep, their sleek forms circling the boat with an eerie synchronicity. The sharks had come not as threats but as honored guests. At the heart of this ritual lay an understanding modern ecology is only beginning to appreciate. Sharks weren't just prey but partners. Before casting a single spear, the Ika would offer gifts: coconut milk poured into the waves, bundles of betel nut tied to floating leaves. These weren't bribes but tokens of respect for the Asi, the shark spirits believed to govern the marine world. The callers saw themselves as intermediaries, their chants a language older than memory. Some melodies were said to mimic the clicks and groans of sharks themselves, a sonic bridge between species. When a shark was finally taken, every part was used: fins for ceremony, teeth for talismans, flesh shared equally among the village, a stark contrast to the waste of industrial shark finning. What's truly remarkable is how deeply this tradition mirrored ecological balance. Shark callers operated under strict taboos. Only certain families could perform the rites. Only specific sharks, like the reef-dwelling blacktips, could be summoned, and hunts were forbidden during mating seasons. These weren't arbitrary rules, they were conservation measures centuries ahead of their time. By limiting catches and avoiding breeding periods, the Ika ensured sharks thrived, which in turn kept fish populations healthy, coral reefs vibrant. Scientists now recognize sharks as keystone species, their presence critical to ocean ecosystems. The callers knew this instinctively, weaving sustainability into spirituality. Yet today, the art of shark calling teeters on extinction. Colonialism and Christianity dismissed it as superstition, while modern fishing methods lure younger generations away with promises of quicker profits. Where hundreds once practiced, fewer than 20 true Ika remain, their chants growing fainter with each passing year. Some elders blame the sharks themselves. The animals no longer come as readily, as if sensing the rupture in the ancient pact. Conservationists scramble to document the remaining callers, realizing too late that their songs hold not just cultural wisdom, but blueprints for coexistence. The tragedy isn't just the loss of a ritual, but the severing of a dialogue, one that viewed sharks not as monsters, but as kindred spirits. In a world where fear dominates our relationship with predators, the shark callers offered something radical: reverence. Their canoes may soon vanish, but their lesson lingers like a whisper on the waves. That harmony isn't found in domination, but in listening. high in the Andes, where the air grows thin and the icy winds howl like restless spirits, the Inca performed sacrifices unlike any other, not of warriors or prisoners, but of children. These weren't acts of cruelty, but of profound reverence. The Capacocha ceremony selected the purest and most beautiful children, often from noble families, to be offered to the mountain gods during times of cosmic upheaval, solar eclipses, volcanic eruptions, or devastating droughts. One such child, a girl no more than 14, was found centuries later atop Mount Ampoto, her body frozen in perfect preservation. Dubbed the Ice Maiden by archaeologists, her delicate features still carried traces of coca leaves pressed between her lips, her fingers clutching tiny gold figurines. She wasn't just a victim, she was a messenger, a bridge between the Inca and the divine. The journey to the summit was itself a sacred act. Selected children were paraded through Cusco, showered with gifts and feasts, treated as living incarnations of the gods they would soon join. Then came the long pilgrimage to the mountains, sometimes spanning hundreds of miles, accompanied by priests and nobles. At the chosen peak, the children were given chicha, a fermented corn drink laced with sedatives, before being laid to rest in shallow graves. Some were wrapped in exquisite textiles, others placed in ceremonial poses, their faces turned toward the rising sun. The cold did more than preserve their bodies. It suspended them in time, turning their resting places into accidental time capsules. What's chilling isn't just the act, but the conviction behind it. To the Inca, these summits were apus, living deities that controlled weather, fertility, and fate. By offering their most precious treasures, their children, they sought to restore balance to a world on the brink of chaos. Forensic analysis of the Ice Maiden's hair revealed her diet changed months before death, shifting to elite foods like maize and animal protein, a sign she was being prepared for her role. Her frozen tissues even held traces of ayahuasca, hinting at ritual visions before her final sleep. These weren't hasty killings, but meticulously orchestrated rites, each step suffused with meaning. The artifacts buried with these children tell their own story. Miniature llamas of gold and silver, intricately woven tunics, seashells from distant coasts, all symbols of the empire's reach. Some scholars believe the children represented the Inca's cosmic order, their sacrifice a way to bind distant provinces to the heartland. Others argue the offerings were literal nourishment. The mountains, like the sun god in Thai, required sustenance to keep the world running. The truth may lie somewhere in between. What's undeniable is how deeply these rituals were tied to the landscape itself. The Andes weren't just a backdrop, they were active participants, their glaciers cradling the bodies until modern climbers stumbled upon them, their cheeks still flushed with the cold, their offerings untouched by time. Today, the Ice Maiden rests in a museum, her face serene behind glass. But her legacy lingers in the whispers of the wind over the peaks, in the way modern Quechua farmers still leave coca leaves at mountain springs. The Capacocha wasn't just about death, it was a dialogue with the earth, a plea wrapped in the most heartbreaking of gifts. To understand it is to glimpse a world where the boundaries between human and holy, between sacrifice and survival, were as thin as the air at 20,000 feet. For 12 days each spring, Babylon transformed into a stage where gods and mortals played out a drama of cosmic proportions. The Akitu festival wasn't just a celebration, it was a carefully choreographed rebirth of the universe itself, centered around Marduk, the city's patron god and champion of order against chaos. The rituals began with an act that would shock any ruler. The king, stripped of his regalia, was dragged before Marduk's statue in the Esagila temple. There he endured a ritual humiliation slapped across the face by the high priest hard enough to draw tears. This wasn't mere theater, it was a test. If the king wept, it signaled Marduk's continued favor, a divine endorsement of his right to rule. But if his cheeks stayed dry, the omens turned dire, hinting at a year of upheaval ahead. The festival's climax unfolded in a mock battle that echoed Babylon's foundational myth. The Enuma Elish, recited in full by priests during the festivities, told of Marduk's victory over Tiamat, the primordial dragon of chaos. As the epic reached its crescendo, actors reenacted the struggle with Marduk's devotees, slaying a figure representing chaos. The symbolism ran deeper than spectacle. The battle mirrored the annual flooding of the Euphrates, which brought both destruction and fertile silt. Just as Marduk had carved order from chaos, the flood's retreat promised renewal, a cycle etched into the land itself. Processions wove through Babylon's streets. Marduk's statue carried from Esagila to the Akitu house, a temple outside the city walls. This journey wasn't just a change of scenery, it represented the god's temporary absence, a symbolic death that preceded his triumphant return. Crowds lined the route, scattering flowers and chanting hymns, their voices rising as the statue crossed the sacred Ishtar gate. The return trip, days later, marked the moment of rebirth. Marduk's arrival back in the city coincided with the spring equinox, daylight finally overtaking darkness. Archaeological fragments reveal how deeply this ritual permeated Babylonian life. Contracts dated to the year after the king's slap show its role in timekeeping, while administrative texts detail the staggering resources poured into the festival: barley for feasts, gold for idols, scarlet wool for the priests' robes. Even captured enemies played a part. Records mention prisoners paraded as symbols of chaos subdued. The Akitu wasn't just a religious event, it was a political engine, reinforcing Babylon's dominance by tying its power to divine mandate. Yet beneath the grandeur lay a profound existential thread. The festival acknowledged a truth modern societies often ignore: order is fragile, chaos ever lurking. By ritually reenacting creation each year, the Babylonians didn't just celebrate their gods, they participated in the upkeep of reality itself. The king's slapped face, the mock battle's choreographed blows, the god's symbolic exile, every act was a stitch in the fabric of the cosmos, a collective insistence that the world could and would begin anew. In the heart of Konya, where the whispers of the medieval mystics still linger in the air, the whirling dervishes of the Mevlevi order perform a ritual that defies earthly logic. Their Sema ceremony isn't just a dance, it's a vortex of devotion where spinning becomes prayer and the body becomes a conduit between heaven and earth. Cloaked in flowing white robes symbolizing death to the ego, their tall felt hats representing tombstones of the self, the dervishes begin with deliberate slowness. Arms crossed over the chest, they circle the sacred space in unison, their movements precise as celestial bodies tracing ancient orbits. Then, with a sudden surrender, the arms unfold, one palm raised to the sky to receive divine grace, the other turned downward to channel it to the world, and the whirling begins. This isn't mere rotation, it's a meticulously choreographed meditation on cosmic harmony. Each spin mirrors the planet's journey around the sun, a physical echo of Rumi's ecstatic poetry. Like a compass, I have one foot fixed in the center and the other roaming the infinite. The dervishes don't fight dizziness because they aren't spinning for spectacle, they're spinning beyond the self, their souls untethered from the pull of gravity and time. The ritual's 4 stages mirror the soul's ascent, from awakening to divine love, from annihilation of the ego to reunion with the eternal. Witnesses often describe the moment the dervishes achieve Sema, that fleeting state where the outer world dissolves and only the divine presence remains. Rumi's influence pulses through every turn. The 13th century poet and mystic founded the Mevlevi order after a transformative encounter with Shams of Tabriz, a wandering dervish who shattered his scholarly complacency. Their friendship sparked a spiritual revolution, one that framed love, not fear, as the path to God. The Sema ceremony embodies this philosophy, its swirling motions a metaphor for the soul's longing to return to its source. Modern neuroscientists studying the dervish's brain activity during the ritual have found striking parallels to deep meditation, with reduced activity in the parietal lobe, the region responsible for spatial orientation, suggesting a genuine transcendence of bodily awareness. UNESCO recognized the Sema as a masterpiece of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity, not just for its artistry but for its message of unity. In a world fractured by division, the whirling dervishes offer a radical vision that all existence spins from the same center, that every atom hums with the same divine breath. Visitors to Konya's Mevlana Museum, where Rumi's tomb lies, still leave notes tucked into its silver grille, prayers wrapped around the same hope that fueled the mystic's verse, that love, in the end, is the only compass worth following. And as the dervishes whirl, their skirts billowing like galaxies, the air itself seems to shimmer with the truth that ecstasy isn't escape, it's coming home. The hills of ancient Ireland blazed with fire on the 1st of May, not as warnings or beacons, but as acts of sacred alchemy. The Beltane festival marked the tipping point between spring's fragile hope and summer's abundance, a night when cattle were driven between twin bonfires to cleanse them of winter's malaise and bless them with fertility. Imagine the scene, farmers chanting as their prized herds lumbered through corridors of flame, the heat licking at their hides while sparks spiraled skyward. Like Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. This wasn't mere spectacle, it was a pact with nature itself. The Celts saw fire as a living force capable of burning away unseen curses and transferring the sun's vigor into the earth. Even the ashes held power scattered across fields to coax life from the soil, Chinese letters smeared on foreheads as protective sigils. Beltane stood in stark contrast to Samhain, its darker counterpart 6 months later. Where Samhain thinned the veil between the living and the dead, Beltane celebrated the raw pulse of life. Where Samhain's fires whispered of endings, Beltane's roared with beginnings. The two festivals framed the Celtic year like bookends, one ushering in light, the other acknowledging darkness. Ritual foods underscored this duality. Samhain's offerings were hearty root vegetables stored for winter, while Beltane feasts burst with fresh dairy and tender greens. The maypole, its phallic silhouette planted firmly in the earth, pulsed with the same symbolism, a declaration that life would always outlast death. What's astonishing isn't just the ritual's age, but its stubborn refusal to vanish. When Christianity swept through Europe, Beltane was rebranded as May Day, its fires disguised as harmless folk tradition, yet the old magic lingered. In Scotland's Highlands, well into the 19th century, families still leaped over embers for luck, and in Ireland, hearth fires were ritually extinguished only to be relit from the communal bonfire's sacred flame. Modern pagans have resurrected these practices with scholarly precision, blending archaeological findings with oral traditions. At events like Edinburgh's Beltane Fire Festival, neo-pagans clad in ochre and antler crowns reenact the old rites with a twist incorporating gender-fluid deities and eco-spirituality, proving the festival's core message still burns bright. That renewal isn't just a hope but a ritual act. The survival of Beltane speaks to something primal in us all, the need to mark time not just with calendars but with fire and fervor. When a Wiccan coven today crowns a May Queen with wildflowers or a Scottish village lights a hillside blaze, they're not just playing at history. They're tapping into a chain of memory that stretches back to a time when the world felt alive with invisible forces, and a well-timed spark could mean the difference between hunger and plenty. That's the true power of Beltane. It turns faith into something you can feel on your skin, smell in the smoke, and see dancing in the flames long after the last ember fades. In the rolling hills of Zululand, when the earth cracked with thirst or the drums of war echoed in the distance, the people turned not to weapons or pleas, but to grass-ordinary river reeds woven into something extraordinary. The Inca ceremony was no mere craft project. It was a sacred lifeline, a coil of power connecting the living to the ancestral realm. Picture this: sangomas, the spiritual healers cloaked in beads and animal skins, gathering at the riverbank at dawn. Their fingers moved with ritual precision, plucking strands of achoni grass never cut with metal, only hand-plucked to preserve its spiritual purity before weaving them into a thick, circular mat. This wasn't just weaving, it was prayer made tangible, each twist of the grass invoking the wisdom of those who had walked the land before. The Inkatha's power lay in its symbolism. The circular shape mirrored the Zulu cosmos, no beginning, no end, a continuum where ancestors remained ever present. As the Sangomas worked, they chanted Isabongo, praise poems calling specific ancestors by name, stitching their voices into the very fibers. Once completed, the mat was placed at the center of the kraal, the community's heart. Elders would kneel around it, pressing their foreheads to its surface as if listening for whispers in the rustle of dried grass. In times of drought, offerings of beer and sorghum were sprinkled atop it, a plea for rain carried to the spirits on this living bridge. During war, warriors circled it barefoot, their feet grounding them in ancestral strength before battle. But the ritual was fraught with taboos that underscored its gravity. No one could step over the Inkatha. To do so was to sever the connection between worlds. Women menstruating were barred from the ceremony, their life-giving energy considered too potent a contrast to the ancestors' ethereal presence. Even the grasses had rules. If a strand snapped during weaving, the entire process halted for cleansing rites. These weren't arbitrary restrictions but safeguards, acknowledging that communion with the unseen demanded reverence. Modern anthropologists note parallels between the Inkatha and other global traditions, from Native American dreamcatchers to Celtic Wicca idols. Yet what set the Zulu practice apart was its communal urgency. This wasn't a personal talisman but a collective cry for intervention, where every member's faith fueled the ritual's potency. Today, while some dismiss the Inkatha as folklore, its legacy persists in unexpected ways. Contemporary Sangomas still weave smaller versions for households seeking guidance, and during South Africa's tumultuous apartheid years, resistance leaders secretly consulted elders versed in the old ways. The Inkatha Freedom Party, though politically controversial, drew its name from this spiritual anchor, a testament to how deeply the ritual resonates in Zulu identity. Yet the true lesson of the Inkatha isn't just in its history, it's in the radical idea that wisdom might be woven from the humblest materials, that a river reed, twisted with intention, could hold the voices of 1,000 ancestors. When the wind blows across those dried grasses now, it doesn't just stir stems, it carries echoes of a people who knew the earth was never silent, only waiting to be heard. The prairie wind carries the scent of sage and sweat as a dancer sways on bleeding feet, his flesh tethered to the sacred cotton wood by leather thongs. This is the Lakota sun dance, not a spectacle, but a solemn pact between human and spirit, where pain becomes prayer and endurance unlocks visions. Banned for decades by colonial governments who saw it as barbaric, the ceremony survived in whispers, passed between generations like embers shielded from the storm. At its core lay a paradox. To transcend the self, one must first embrace suffering so profound it shatters the ego. The ritual began with hunters scouting for the perfect tree, a cottonwood, its heart-shaped leaves symbolizing the connection between earth and sky. Once found, the tree became the Waga Chun, the center of the world, ceremonially felled and erected in the dance arbor. As drummers pounded rhythms mirroring the earth's pulse, participants prepared through days of fasting and purification. Then came the piercing, skewers of bone or wood thrust through the skin of the chest or back, tied to ropes that linked the dancer to the tree. With each lunge against these bonds, the flesh tore not as punishment but as liberation. Blood dripping into the soil was an offering to Wakantanka, the Great Spirit, in exchange for healing rains, bison's return, or a vision to guide the people. What outsiders misunderstood as mere masochism was in fact a meticulous theology of renewal. The sun dance mirrored the sacrifice of Tatanka, the white buffalo, who gave his body so the people might live. Dancers didn't seek pain for its own sake. They sought the moment when exhaustion blurred into ecstasy, when the veil between worlds grew thin enough to glimpse ancestral voices or animal guides. Some received prophecies, others emerged with renewed purpose, their scars testaments to vows made, to sobriety, to leadership, to mending broken relationships. The entire community bore witness, their collective energy fueling the dancers' endurance. Children learned early that healing often demands sacrifice, that resilience is woven into the fabric of their cosmology. When the US government outlawed the sun dance in the 1880s, labeling it violent and heathenish, they struck at more than a ritual. They targeted the Lakota's spiritual nervous system. But prohibition couldn't extinguish the ceremony's embers. Families performed abbreviated versions in secret, masking the piercing as folk dances, or holding ceremonies in remote canyons where agents wouldn't venture. The tree might be smaller, the gathering quieter, but the intent remained, to suffer so the people might thrive. Today, the sun dance has re-emerged not as a relic but a living practice, adapted yet unbroken. Modern participants include veterans seeking to shed the weight of war, addicts craving rebirth, even non-natives invited by elders to learn its lessons, though debates simmer over cultural boundaries. The essence, however, endures, a defiant insistence that wounds can become portals, that a community's survival sometimes hangs by leather thongs and unwavering faith. As the sun sets over the arbor, the dancers' shadows stretch long across the earth, merging with those of their ancestors, proof that some prayers are written not in words but in blood and motion. The streets of ancient China flicker with the glow of 1,000 paper lanterns, but these flames aren't meant to guide the living, they're beacons for the dead. The Hungry Ghost Festival, or Zhongyuan Jai, transforms the 7th lunar month into a realm where the veil between worlds grows thin, and restless spirits roam with hollow bellies and unfinished business. This isn't Halloween, it's a solemn reckoning, a time when families offer feasts to ancestors while desperately placating the forgotten souls who might otherwise bring misfortune. Picture this: sidewalks lined with makeshift altars piled high with steaming bowls of rice, golden roast pork, and stacks of joss paper folded into ingots, currency for the afterlife, burned to ash so it may reappear in the spirit realm as wealth. But the most haunting offerings aren't the food or money. It's the empty chairs placed carefully beside each meal, left unoccupied for unseen guests. The festival's roots coil deep into China's spiritual soil, a tangle of Buddhist compassion and Taoist cosmology. Buddhist tradition holds that during this month, the gates of Diyu, the underworld, swing open, releasing spirits trapped in purgatory to seek solace or vengeance. Taoist beliefs amplify this, warning that hungry ghosts, those who died violently or without descendants to honor them, wander the earth in agony, their throats too narrow to swallow, their bellies eternally empty. To ignore them is to risk curses, accidents, or worse. But here's the twist: these aren't just fearsome phantoms, they're pitiable figures, victims of circumstance deserving empathy. Temples overflow with crowds chanting the Yulanpan Sutra, a Buddhist text that teaches feeding these ghosts is as vital as feeding one's own ancestors, a radical act of universal kinship. Opera stages erupt with color during Ghost Month, but the front row seats remain eerily empty. These performances, called getai, aren't for the living. Elaborate costumes and clanging cymbals draw wandering spirits away from households, the vibrant spectacle a distraction to keep them from lingering where they're not welcome. Superstitions dictate strict rules: never sit in the first row reserved for ghosts, never sing along, it invites attachment, and never pick up coins left on the street, their bribes dropped to divert evil. Even the air thrums with caution: children are tucked indoors by dusk, and weddings or business deals are postponed lest they attract spectral envy. Yet beneath the dread lies a breathtaking cultural alchemy. In Taiwan and Hong Kong, entire streets become galleries of paper effigies, mansions, smartphones, even designer handbags, all meticulously crafted from bamboo and colored paper, then burned to ensure the dead keep pace with modernity. In Malaysia, devotees float lanterns shaped like lotus flowers down rivers, each tiny flame a prayer for a soul's liberation. The festival's genius is its duality. It's as much about social responsibility as spiritual survival. Communities pool resources to feed the anonymous dead, recognizing that forgotten spirits could be anyone: a lone soldier, a homeless child, a victim of some long-ago injustice. Archaeologists have uncovered Tang Dynasty texts describing early ghost festival rites, proving its grip on the Chinese psyche spans millennia. But what's most striking isn't its age, it's its adaptability. Today, eco-conscious reformers advocate for digital joss paper or biodegradable offerings, while urbanites stream virtual ceremonies on their phones. Yet the core remains unchanged, an acknowledgement that the past never truly leaves us, that the hungry ghosts of history, whether spectral or societal, demand to be seen, fed, and finally set free. When the last embers of the paper money fade and the seventh moon wanes, what lingers isn't fear, but the quiet understanding that compassion, even for the unseen, is what keeps the world in balance. The rhythm of the drums isn't just music in a Vodou ceremony, it's a language, a pulse so potent it bends the boundary between worlds. In the flickering light of a peristyle, the temple's sacred space, bodies sway not just to the beat but to something far older as the LWA, the spirits of Vodou, step into the living. These aren't the grotesque possessions of Hollywood horror, they're sacred encounters, moments where the divine borrows human form to speak, heal, or chastise. When a devotee's eyes roll back and their posture shifts, it's not chaos unfolding, it's protocol. The LWA arrive with distinct personalities. The fiery Azuli Dantor might command the room with a stern grace, while the trickster Jeed might provoke laughter with bawdy jokes, his presence marked by sunglasses tilted over the possessed's eyes. Each spirit has its own songs, its own rhythms, its own way of moving through the world. What outsiders often misunderstand is the discipline beneath the ecstasy. Before a ceremony, initiates fast, bathe in herbal infusions, and abstain from certain activities to purify themselves as vessels. The drummers, trained from childhood, know that a single misplaced beat can derail the ritual. The dances aren't freeform, they're precise motions passed down through generations, each step a key to unlocking the Elwha's presence. When possession occurs, the community snaps into action. Someone steadies the devotee as their consciousness yields. Others hand the spirit its preferred offerings: rum for Baron Samedi, perfume for Azuli Freda. This isn't loss of control, it's surrender to a higher order, a fleeting merger of mortal and immortal. The irony of Vodou's demonization is that it was this very faith that fueled Haiti's liberation. At Bois Cayman in 1791, enslaved Africans gathered under the cover of night for a ceremony that would change history. A priestess sacrificed a black pig, its blood binding the attendees to a sacred pact, freedom or death. The LWA Ogu, warrior spirit of iron and revolution, was invoked as drums pounded like advancing footsteps. Days later, plantations burned. Hollywood reduced this moment to black magic, but the truth was far more profound. Vodou provided the spiritual backbone for the only successful slave revolt in the Americas. The French mocked the rebels' superstitions even as they fled their machetes. Today, Vodou remains Haiti's cultural heartbeat despite centuries of persecution. After the earthquake of 2010, it was Vodou priests who performed rites for the unburied dead, guiding lost souls to the afterlife when churches crumbled. The LWA aren't relics, they're witnesses to resilience, their stories etched in the sweat of dancers and the smoke of candlelit altars. To dismiss possession as mere theatrics is to miss the point entirely. It's a dialogue with the invisible, a testament to the idea that the sacred isn't distant but as close as your own breath, waiting for the drums to call it home. The whispers started in the vineyards outside Rome, stories of women slipping away at night, their hair loose, their faces flushed with something more intoxicating than wine. By 186 BC, these murmurs had erupted into full-blown panic among Rome's elite. The Bacchanalia, secret rites dedicated to Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and liberation, had taken root in the Republic like a vine strangling an oak. What began as a foreign cult, likely imported from Greek colonies in southern Italy, had mutated into something the Senate found far more dangerous, a movement threatening to unravel the very fabric of Roman order. At first glance, the ritual seemed harmless enough. Initiates, both men and women, would gather under cover of darkness, dancing to the frenetic beat of tambourines and flutes. They drank unmixed wine, a practice Romans considered barbaric, and entered states of trance-like possession, believing themselves filled with the god's spirit. But as the cult grew, so did the rumors. Whispers of nocturnal orgies, ritualized violence, even poisoning circulated through the forum, the most shocking allegation. That women traditionally confined to the domestic sphere were not just participants but leaders, orchestrating ceremonies where social hierarchies dissolved in the chaos of the dance. The Senate's crackdown was swift and brutal. A surviving decree, the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, ordered the cult's suppression with chilling precision. Meeting places were destroyed, leaders executed, and thousands arrested. The law didn't just ban the Bacchanalia, it criminalized gatherings of more than 3 people for religious purposes without state approval, effectively placing Roman religion under government control for the first time. What fueled this overreaction? It wasn't just morality, it was terror. Rome, fresh from wars with Carthage, was hyper-vigilant against anything resembling insurrection. The Bacchanalia's mixed class, mixed-gender membership posed a unique threat. Slaves and aristocrats, men and women, all equals in Dionysus' eyes. That wasn't religion. To the Senate, it was sedition. Modern historians sift through the scandal with skepticism. Livy's account, dripping with lurid detail, reads more like propaganda than reportage. Excavations of Bacchic sanctuaries reveal no evidence of the alleged depravity, just votive offerings of masks and wine vessels. Some scholars argue the orgies were likely just exuberant worship, twisted by elites who feared losing control. Others point to a deeper cultural clash. Dionysus represented everything Rome's stoic, militaristic ethos rejected: surrender to emotion, blurring of identities, the wild versus the civilized. The true legacy of the Bacchanalia isn't in its excesses but in its paradox. Rome stamped out the cult, yet Dionysus endured, rebranded as Bacchus and sanitized into state-approved festivals like the Liberalia. The repression backfired, too, by recording their edict so meticulously. The Senate preserved the very secrets they sought to erase. Today, those fragments of bronze inscribed with their panic offer a tantalizing glimpse of a moment when Rome trembled before the power of ecstasy, when the real scandal wasn't what happened in the dark, but who might be dancing there. Beneath the unrelenting sun of the Australian outback, where the red earth stretches endlessly to meet a cobalt sky, Aboriginal adolescents embark on a journey that will etch the land into their bones: the walkabout. This isn't just a rite of passage, it's a living dialogue with the dreaming, the ancestral epoch when spirit beings shaped the world. For months, sometimes years, these young souls traverse hundreds of miles alone, armed with nothing but whispered wisdom from elders and the songs that map the desert like invisible highways. Every waterhole, every rock formation, every twisted gum tree is more than a landmark. It's a chapter in a story older than time, a story they must now internalize to become custodians of their culture. The walkabout's brilliance lies in its dual purpose. On one level, it's a brutal test of survival. Initiates learn to track kangaroos by the faintest disturbances in the dust, to find water in the hollows of desert oaks, to read the stars not as constellations but as seasonal calendars. But beneath these practical skills thrums something deeper, the realization that the land is not inert but sentient. Dreamtime stories passed down through millennia in intricate songlines, teach that a particular cliff might be the frozen body of an ancestral kangaroo, or that a dry riverbed pulses with the memory of a rainbow serpent's journey. To survive the walkabout is to prove you can listen to the land's whispers and respond. Kinship ties are the invisible threads guiding this odyssey. Before departure, elders painstakingly trace the initiate's genealogy, mapping which territories they are permitted to cross based on their totemic affiliations. A kangaroo clan member might follow routes tied to that ancestor's songline, avoiding sacred sites reserved for emu or honey ant lineages. This isn't arbitrary restriction, it's spiritual ecology, ensuring no single area is overburdened by human presence. When a youth returns, their stories of encounters with distant relatives, both human and animal, weave new strands into the community's collective memory, reinforcing bonds that stretch across the continent. Modern anthropologists have noted startling parallels between walkabout routes and modern ecological surveys. The paths avoid overhunted areas during breeding seasons, circle around fragile water sources, and align with migratory patterns of key species. What Western science calls sustainable land management, Aboriginal cultures encoded in ritual millennia ago. The initiation isn't just about proving resilience, it's about signing a contract with the earth, one written in footprints and sung into existence. Yet the walkabout's true heart lies in its spiritual alchemy. There's a moment, elders say, when the initiate stops seeing the desert as an adversary and starts feeling it as family. Hunger becomes a teacher, solitude a mirror. Some return with songs gifted by encounters with ancestral spirits. Others bear scars from trials that mark their transition into adulthood. But all carry back the unshakable certainty that they belong to the land far more than it belongs to them. In a world racing toward ecological crisis, this ancient ritual offers a radical question. What if survival isn't about conquering nature, but conversing with it? The red dust of the outback holds the answer not in words, but in the footsteps of those who have walked its songlines and returned transformed. The wind howls through the birch trees of ancient Scandinavia as a figure cloaked in blue and white steps forward, a gnarled staff clutched in one hand, a spindle whorl in the other. This is no ordinary seer, this is a Völva, a master of Seidr, the Norse magic so potent it blurred the lines between worlds, genders, and even the gods themselves. Unlike the blunt force of runes or the battlefield chants of berserkers, Seidr was a sorcery of subtle threads, weaving fate itself through trance, prophecy, and taboo. And at its heart lay a paradox, a magic so revered that Odin himself endured humiliation to learn it, yet so controversial that its practitioners were whispered about long after Scandinavia turned Christian. Seidr's power lay in its defiance of norms, practiced primarily by women, though not exclusively. It involved entering ecstatic trances atop high platforms or enclosed spaces, often aided by chanting, drumming, or hallucinogenic brews. The Völva would travel the fetch road, a spirit journey through the 9 realms, seeking answers in the whispers of the dead or the movements of birds. But what unsettled Viking society wasn't just the magic, it was the blurring of boundaries it required. Seidr practitioners often wore clothing that crossed gender lines, adopting the ergi, unmanliness taboo to channel their power. Staffs like the one found in the Oseberg ship burial weren't mere tools, they were conduits to the unseen, carved with symbols that mirrored the world tree Yggdrasil. To wield Seidr was to straddle the knife's edge between respect and revulsion. Odin's relationship with Seidr reveals its double-edged nature. The sagas tell how the All-Father, ever hungry for knowledge, learned the art from the goddess Freya, but not without cost. In the Lokasana, Loki mocks Odin for practicing unmanly magic, a jab that cuts deep in a culture prizing martial valor. Yet Odin endures the insult because Seidr grants him what even his spear cannot foresight. His infamous self-sacrifice on Yggdrasil, hanging for 9 nights to win the runes, mirrors the Völva's trance states. Both are acts of surrender to gain hidden wisdom. That the god of war and poetry also mastered this feminine magic speaks volumes. Seither wasn't weak, but so formidable it demanded the suspension of ego. Christianity's arrival twisted Seither's legacy into something darker. The very practices once respected as divine communion were recast as devilry. Völvas became wicks witches, their staffs swapped for broomsticks in the new iconography of evil. The Unglinga saga, written post-conversion, retroactively condemned Seither as sorcery that brought death, erasing its role as a sacred social glue. Archaeological finds, though, tell a different story. Grave goods like the Firkat wand, inscribed with protective symbols, or the Baltic amber amulets found in Völva burials, suggest these women were honored healers and advisors. Their tools weren't hidden but displayed proudly, until the new faith made them relics of a forbidden past. What lingers most hauntingly is Seither's modern resonance. Contemporary shamans in Scandinavia have revived its techniques, blending them with indigenous Sami practices. Scholars debate whether it influenced Europe's later cunning folk traditions. But perhaps its greatest lesson is timeless. That power often lies where society least expects it, in the hands of those unafraid to straddle borders, whether between genders, worlds, or what's deemed proper. The Völva's staff may have rotted away, but the thread she spun still quivers with secrets, waiting for those willing to listen. The quietest rebellion against life itself unfolds not with shouts, but with silence. A Jain monk seated cross-legged on a wooden platform, their breath slowing as they willingly relinquish food, water, and eventually the body itself. This is Santhara, the ultimate act of non-violence in a tradition where even stepping on an ant is considered sinful. To outsiders, it resembles suicide, but for Jain ascetics, it's the culmination of a lifelong spiritual journey, a conscious shedding of the physical to free the soul from the cycle of rebirth. The ritual is meticulous. The practitioner publicly declares their intent, seeks forgiveness from all living beings, and methodically withdraws from worldly attachments. Days pass without complaint as the body withers, the mind fixed on transcending earthly bonds. Supporters describe it as a sacred rite, the ultimate defiance against suffering. Detractors call it glorified starvation, a relic that has no place in modern society. The controversy sharpens when set against Western perspectives on euthanasia. In places like Switzerland or Canada, assisted dying is framed as mercy, ending pain when medicine fails. But Santhara isn't about escaping agony, it's about achieving clarity. There's no terminal illness required, only the conviction that one's spiritual work is complete. Legal battles in India have raged for years, with courts oscillating between banning the practice as suicide and upholding it as protected religious expression. In 2015, a Rajasthan High Court judgment briefly criminalized Santhara, sparking outrage from Jain communities who saw it as an assault on their deepest beliefs. The ruling was later stayed, but the tension lingers. How does a secular state balance individual faith against societal ethics? Dig deeper, and the ritual reveals layers of philosophical rigor. Jainism's core principle, ahimsa non-violence, extends beyond physical harm to the subtle violence of desire. By willingly embracing death without resistance, the practitioner severs the last threads of attachment, even to life itself. Historical texts like the Acharanga Sutra detail Santhara's protocols, the gradual reduction of food, the recitation of mantras to purify karma, the final moments spent in meditative equipoise. Modern practitioners often document their journey, leaving behind letters that read like metaphysical manifestos. One monk's note simply stated, "The body is a guest house, the soul is packing its bags." Yet the ethical dilemmas are undeniable. Critics point to cases where family pressure or social prestige might cloud true consent, especially among elderly adherents. Unlike medically assisted death, Santhara lacks institutional oversight, no panels to assess mental competence, no safeguards against coercion. Defenders counter that the practice's very publicity acts as a check. The community witnesses the decision, and backing out is allowed until the final stages. The debate mirrors broader clashes between religious autonomy and human rights, where cultural relativism collides with universal ideals. Perhaps what unsettles us most isn't the act itself, but the worldview it demands. In a culture obsessed with prolonging life at all costs, Santhara poses an uncomfortable question. What if death isn't failure but mastery? The ritual's persistence, despite legal threats and modernization, hints at something deeper than tradition. It's a living challenge to our assumptions, a whisper that true freedom might lie not in clinging, but in letting go. As medical technology stretches lifespans ever longer, the Jain path offers a stark alternative, that the art of dying well could be the ultimate spiritual art. In the golden glow of a Mesopotamian twilight, the king ascended the steps of the ziggurat not as a ruler but as a supplicant, his crown set aside, his royal robes exchanged for simpler garments. Above him, in the temple's inner sanctum, a priestess awaited, her body adorned with lapis lazuli and carnelian, her voice trained to channel the cadences of a goddess. This was the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, a ritual so vital to the survival of Sumer that its performance was believed to hold the very cycles of nature in balance. At its heart lay a profound symmetry. The king, embodying the shepherd god Dumuzi, would unite with the high priestess who became Inanna, goddess of love and war, in a ceremony that blurred the lines between mortal and divine, eros and harvest, palace and temple. The act itself was both intimate and intensely public. Cuneiform tablets from Ur and Uruk detail the ritual's choreography with startling specificity. The priestess, seated on a throne draped in sacred linens, would recite hymns praising Dumuzi's virility. "My vulva is the horned moon, my womb the fertile field awaiting your seed," while the king responded with vows of devotion. Their union, often literal but sometimes symbolic, was accompanied by musicians playing lyres tuned to the mode of Inanna, a scale said to mirror her celestial movements. Outside the temple, crowds feasted on roasted meats and honeyed cakes, their celebrations a communal acknowledgement that the fertility of the land was inextricably tied to this divine coupling. But the Hieros Gamos was more than agrarian insurance, it was political theater of the highest order. By participating, the king demonstrated his legitimacy, proving he could channel the gods' favor not just through conquest or decree, but through sacred intimacy. A failed ritual, or worse, a king deemed unworthy to perform it, could trigger droughts, rebellions, or the collapse of dynasties. The priestess, meanwhile, wielded power rarely afforded to women in antiquity. As Inanna's avatar, she could bless or withhold, her approval tantamount to divine sanction. Tablet fragments from Lagash even hint at priestesses negotiating land rights and trade deals in the ritual's aftermath, their authority lingering like perfume long after the goddess's presence had faded. The erotic hymns preserved on cracked clay tablets reveal a cosmology where sexuality and sovereignty were intertwined. One text describes Inanna's lapis lazuli thighs parting like the heavens, her pleasure synonymous with the land's bounty. Another compares Dumuzi's semen to the Euphrates in flood, his potency ensuring the barley would rise tall and the dates sweeten. Modern scholars debate whether these were mere metaphors, poetic license to sanctify a royal bloodline, or genuine belief in the ritual's metaphysical mechanics. What's undeniable is how deeply the imagery permeated Mesopotamian thought. Cylinder seals depict the sacred couple flanked by sheaves of grain, their union witnessed by star-faced deities. Even the layout of cities mirrored the rite, with temples and palaces positioned as anatomical counterparts in an urban body. Yet the Hieros Gamos wasn't static, it evolved with the tides of empire. When Babylon rose to prominence, the ritual shifted to feature Marduk and his consort Sarpanit, reflecting new theological priorities. Assyrian kings, ever the militarists, downplayed the erotic in favor of triumphal processions. though traces of the old rite lingered in coronation ceremonies. By the time of Persia's conquest, the practice had faded, its last iterations reduced to shadow plays performed by temple acolytes. What endures is the haunting beauty of its paradox, a moment where sex became liturgy, where a king's touch could coax rain from barren skies, and where a priestess's cry echoed not just through bedchambers, but across the endless fields that fed a civilization. To dismiss the sacred marriage as primitive fertility magic is to miss its radical heart. A recognition that power, in its purest form, requires both vulnerability and consummation. The ziggurats may crumble, but the whispers of those hymns still resonate, a reminder that even empires are built on acts of faith, both tender and terrifying. The streets of Bali erupt in a riot of color, not for a festival but for a funeral. Towering bamboo structures sway dangerously as dozens of shoulders bear them through narrow village lanes, their tears draped in gold and crimson cloth. Gamelan orchestras clang and chime, their metallic melodies cutting through laughter and chatter. To outsiders, it might look like carnival, but this is Ungaben, the Balinese Hindu cremation ceremony, and beneath its dazzling surface lies a profound metaphysical journey. Far from mourning, families pour their energy into crafting elaborate offerings, paper money, intricate cakes, even tiny cars and smartphones, all destined for the flames. These aren't tokens of grief, they're supplies for the soul's next adventure. At the heart of Ungaben is the Bade, the towering funeral tower that can reach 9 meters tall. Built over weeks by the community, it's more than just a transport for the deceased, it's a cosmic ladder. Each tier represents a layer of existence from the earthly realm to the heavens. The body, wrapped in white and placed inside, isn't just a corpse, it's a vessel about to be unshackled. As the procession moves toward the cremation ground, the tower is spun violently at every crossroads. This isn't chaos, it's intentional disorientation, meant to confuse malevolent spirits who might hitch a ride to the afterlife. The climax unfolds at the Pemulan, the cremation site, where the body is transferred into a sarcophagus shaped like a bull, lion, or mythical creature, each symbolizing attributes like strength or wisdom. The priest chants mantras as the flames take hold, but the mood stays strangely buoyant. Children play near the edges, relatives snap selfies. This apparent nonchalance baffles tourists, but it's rooted in Balinese theology. Death isn't an end, but a promotion. The fire isn't destruction, it's liberation, purifying the soul so it can shed its earthly attachments and ascend toward reincarnation or moksha, ultimate release. Music plays a role deeper than mere accompaniment. The gameland's dissonant scales and interlocking rhythms mimic the universe's own vibrations, guiding the soul through the bardo-like state between lives. Certain compositions, like the solemn, gending pendulum bar, are reserved exclusively for Ungaben, their melodies acting as sonic maps for the disoriented spirit. Even the laughter serves a purpose. Tears, Balinese believe, weigh down the soul with earthly longing, while joy lifts it toward the divine. Misunderstandings arise when visitors mistake this joy for indifference. Western funerals often emphasize grief as love's measure, but Ungaben flips that script. The more elaborate the ceremony, the deeper the love, just expressed through celebration, not sorrow. Families go into debt for these rites, not out of obligation but devotion. A poorly executed Ungaben risks trapping the soul in limbo, forced to wander as a restless layak. That's why even the ashes matter. Collected after cooling, they're carried to the sea or a sacred river in a final act of release, the physical body dissolving as the soul sheds its last anchor. Archaeologists tracing Ungaben's roots find layers of cultural fusion. Ancient animist beliefs in ancestral spirits blend with Hindu cosmology, while the tower's designs echo India's Vedic fire altars. Colonial Dutch accounts describe ceremonies even more elaborate than today's, with live buffalo sacrificed and gold-leafed towers. Modern pressures, tourism, land scarcity have streamlined some rituals, but the core persists. Even Babylonians who adopt other faiths often return to Hinduism in death, unwilling to forsake Ungaben's promise of cosmic navigation. What lingers after the ashes disperse isn't just smoke, but a radical philosophy. In a world terrified of death's finality, Ungaben offers a vision where mortality is just another threshold, where fire becomes a midwife to rebirth. The next time you hear gamelan music ringing through Bali's hills, listen closer. Those aren't just notes, they're a love song to eternity. When midsummer's golden light stretches Slavic villages into long, enchanted evenings, an ancient pulse quickens beneath the soil. Cupola night arrives, a celebration where young women weave flower crowns from clover and chamomile, their fingers moving with the same rhythm as their grandmothers, while young men hunt for the mythical fern flower said to bloom only at midnight, its glow revealing untold treasures. This is no quaint folk festival. It's a living relic of pre-Christian earth worship where fire and water, masculinity and femininity, are drawn into a sacred dance older than the first Orthodox churches built atop pagan groves. The bonfire is the ritual's beating heart, not just any fire, but one kindled by friction, the rubbing of sacred woods, a spark born of human hands mimicking the sun's zenith. Couples leap hand in hand over the flames, their arcs cutting through the smoke like promises. The higher the jump, the stronger the love, or so the tradition claims. But look deeper and you'll see an act of purification, the flames licking away winter's residue, just as our ancestors believed. In some villages, elders still whisper that a woman's wreath cast into the fire predicts her fate. Floating ashes mean a happy marriage, while sinking flowers foretell loneliness. It's a rare moment when Slavic paganism's raw vitality pierces through centuries of Christian veneer. Then comes the water's turn. Rivers and lakes, deemed portals to the spirit world on this night, beckon with their own rituals. Maidens float their wreaths downstream, each blossom-crowned circle a silent prayer for fertility. If a man retrieves one, their bond is sealed under Cupola's watch. In Belarus, some daring souls still practice the old divinations, walking backward into waist-deep water, holding a candle to glimpse their future spouse's face in the ripples. The Church tried to rebrand these rites as John's Eve, linking them to St. John the Baptist, but the old names cling like dew to grass. Even the herbs gathered at dawn time, St. John's wort and the elusive cupola grass retain their pagan potency, woven into amulets to ward off evil until the next midsummer. The darkest threads of Cupola's tapestry reveal its origins as a celebration of the god Yarilo, deity of spring and passion, whose effigies were once drowned or burned to ensure cyclical rebirth. Folk songs still echo this sacrifice, their lyrics speaking of a wedding between fire and water, life and death. Archaeologists find traces of these proto-rituals in excavated pit houses, where charred seeds and animal bones suggest feasts meant to appease forces far older than scripture. What's mesmerizing isn't just Cupola's persistence, but its adaptability. In Ukraine, Christian crosses now crown some wreaths, while in Poland, priests bless the bonfires, a grudging compromise between faiths. Modern neo-pagans revive the old chants, their voices rising alongside DJs at music festivals where Cupola's flames flicker across smartphone screens. The magic hasn't faded, it's shape-shifted. When a Lithuanian villager whispers that the ferns truly bloomed for her great-aunt in 1942, or a Russian teenager dares a midnight swim because it's tradition, Cupola lives on, not as superstition, but as the unbroken thread between earth and those who walk upon it, forever chasing the light that refuses to die. High on the wind-scoured plateaus of Tibet, where the air is so thin it hums like a plucked wire, a lone figure sits in a circle of upturned skull cups. The churd practitioner, clad in robes stitched from burial shrouds, raises a kangling, a trumpet carved from a human femur, and sounds a note that cuts through the silence like a blade. This is no mere performance, it's an act of radical spiritual surgery, where the meditator dissects their own ego with the precision of a butcher parting flesh from bone. The ritual's name says it all. Cherd translates to cutting, and its goal is as stark as the Himalayan landscape: to sever attachment to the self by confronting the deepest fears we cling to for survival. At its core lies a meditation so visceral it defies Western notions of mindfulness. Practitioners visualize their own bodies being dismembered, offered not in sacrifice but in sacred feast. The imagery is unflinching: bones splintered for marrow, organs laid bare on an altar of emptiness, the flesh itself devoured by demons and deities alike. Yet this isn't self-loathing, it's alchemy. By willingly surrendering the physical form in meditation, the Cherdpa practitioner exposes the ego's ultimate illusion, that we are separate, permanent, and solid. The demons consuming the imagined body, they're not external forces, but manifestations of our own clinging to identity, to desire, to the fear of annihilation. The ritual's founder, Machig Labdrön, was an 11th century yogini who shattered gender norms and spiritual dogmas alike. Her teachings flipped traditional Buddhist practice on its head. While monks sought enlightenment in secluded monasteries, Machig instructed her followers to seek out the places that terrified them most: cremation grounds, battlefields, the bedsides of plague victims. Her revelation was simple yet revolutionary. Fear isn't an obstacle to enlightenment, it's the whetstone that sharpens wisdom. A surviving text attributed to her puts it bluntly: if you chase demons, they multiply. If you feed them, they vanish. Modern neuroscience offers an eerie parallel to this ancient practice. Studies on exposure therapy show that confronting feared stimuli, whether spiders or traumatic memories, weakens their emotional grip. The Cherd ritual takes this principle to its metaphysical extreme. By mentally offering their body to imagined horrors, practitioners systematically desensitize themselves to death's specter, transforming terror into liberation. The Kangeling's mournful wail isn't just an instrument. It's a neurological trigger, the bone's hollow resonance guiding the mind into altered states where such radical visualization becomes possible. Yet Cherd's power isn't just in its shock value. The ritual structure reveals layers of sophisticated psychology. Before the visualization begins, practitioners recite elaborate prayers invoking Prajna Paramita, the goddess of transcendent wisdom. These verses aren't mere liturgy, they're cognitive scaffolding, framing the act as one of compassion. The demons aren't enemies but guests. The dismemberment isn't violence but generosity. In Tibet's remote hermitages, old masters still tell of Cherdpas whose practice became so profound that wild animals, wolves, vultures, would gather peacefully during their meditations, as if sensing the boundlessness of their offering. The ritual's tools themselves are lessons in impermanence. The Kangeling, often inscribed with mantras, reminds the practitioner that their own bones will one day be relics. The Damaru drum, its two hemispheres representing wisdom and method, beats a rhythm that mirrors the heart's inevitable stillness. Even the skull cups, if one looks closely, show hairline fractures, deliberate flaws to underscore that not even death's implements are perfect. What unsettles outsiders about Cherd isn't the gore, but the unapologetic intimacy with mortality. In an era obsessed with sanitizing death, the ritual forces a reckoning. If we can't face the dissolution of our own flesh in meditation, how will we face it in life's final moments? The answer whispers through the Kangeling's bone song, not as nihilism, but as the ultimate freedom. When Machig Labdrön's followers chant, "I give my body without regret," they're not courting morbidity. They're celebrating the truth that no attachment, not even to the self, can survive the cleaving blade of absolute awareness. And in that severing, they find what was never truly lost: the vast, open sky of mind, unclouded by fear. The drums speak first, deep, resonant tones that ripple through the Yoruba village like a heartbeat from another world. Then comes the rustle of fabric, layer upon layer, as a towering figure emerges from the sacred grove. This is no ordinary dancer. This is Egungun, the embodied spirit of an ancestor, wrapped in swirling textiles that whisper of lineage, power, and secrets only the dead can tell. The masquerade's costume isn't just clothing, it's a moving archive. Every fold of imported velvet, every strip of hand-woven Aso oak, even the cowrie shells stitched in intricate patterns, they're not decorations but a language. A strip of indigo might denote an ancestor's royal status, while a splash of crimson commemorates a warrior's spilled blood. The fabrics themselves are chosen with meticulous care, often passed down through generations, absorbing the sweat and prayers of previous rituals until they thrum with their own kind of life. What makes the Egungun ceremony so electrifying is its duality. To the uninitiated, it's a performance, a whirl of color and sound, but for the Yoruba, it's a sacred dialogue. When the masked dancer moves, it's not a person under there, not anymore. The Egungun is the ancestor incarnate, their wisdom channeled through the rustle of cloth and the rhythmic stomping of feet. Communities prepare for months, cleansing the village and crafting offerings to ensure the spirits arrive peacefully. The moment the masquerade appears, a hush falls over the elders. Children are whisked away if they're too young to understand. Because this isn't theater, it's transformation. The interaction between the living and the Egungun follows ancient protocols. No one touches the masquerade. To do so risks severing the fragile connection between worlds. Instead, the spirit communicates through gestures. A flourish of fabric might signal approval, while a sudden stillness could warn of impending misfortune. Some Egungun even speak, their voices distorted by hidden resonators to sound otherworldly. Devotees bring petitions written on slips of paper, slipped between the costume's layers for the ancestors to consider. But the ritual isn't just about receiving blessings, it's accountability. An Egungun might chastise a community for moral failings or remind them of forgotten traditions, its words carrying the weight of generations. Archaeological evidence shows how deeply rooted this practice is. Terracotta sculptures from Ife, dating back to the 12th century, depict figures draped in patterned cloth strikingly similar to modern Egungun regalia. Oral histories tell of masquerades so powerful they could summon rain or reveal hidden truths about lineage, like the legendary Egungun Ilwe, said to unveil infidelities by pointing its staff at the guilty. Yet the tradition is far from frozen. Contemporary Egungun costumes now incorporate synthetic fabrics and even recycled plastics, reimagining ancestral connections for a changing world. Nigerian artists like Nike Davies Okunde have elevated the motifs onto gallery walls, sparking debates about sacred art's place in commercial spaces. The true magic of Egungun lies in its paradox. It's both deeply personal and expansively communal. A single masquerade might embody one specific ancestor for a family's private rites, then transform into a collective forebear during public festivals. The costumes themselves are rarely stored. They're often disassembled after each ceremony, their fabrics redistributed or burned, ensuring the next iteration carries fresh energy. In a world obsessed with preserving the past, the Yoruba embrace a fluid immortality, where the dead return not as static relics, but as collaborators in an ever-evolving dance. When the last drum fades and the Egungun vanishes back into the grove, what lingers isn't just memory, but the unshakable certainty that the line between the living and the departed was never a barrier at all, just a veil waiting to be parted. Deep beneath the streets of ancient Rome, in candlelit chambers hidden from the uninitiated, a figure kneels before an altar carved with constellations. His dagger glints as it hovers over a bull's throat, not a living beast but an effigy, its stone flanks etched with zodiac signs. This is the Tauroctony, the sacred bull slaying at the heart of Mithraism, one of the most enigmatic cults to challenge early Christianity for the soul of the empire. To outsiders, it might seem like simple idolatry, but every detail from the scorpion nipping at the bull's genitals to the dog and snake lapping at its blood was a celestial cipher, a star map masquerading as sacrifice. Mithras himself, often depicted in a Phrygian cap with his cape billowing like the night sky, wasn't just a god. He was a cosmic locksmith. The bull he slew represented Taurus, and each element of the scene corresponded to constellations. The dog was Canis Minor, the snake Hydra, the scorpion Scorpio. The ritual reenacted the moment when Mithras, by killing the celestial bull, triggered the precession of the equinoxes, shifting the ages from Taurus to Aries. For initiates, this wasn't mythology, it was astronomy encoded as theology. The underground temples, or Mithraea, mirrored this celestial order. Aligned with the solstices, their vaulted ceilings painted with stars, they were microcosms of the universe where soldiers and merchants alike underwent grueling initiations to ascend through 7 grades, each tied to a planet. The cult's appeal lay in its exclusivity and empathy. Unlike Christianity's open embrace, Mithraism thrived in secrecy. Its rites reserved for men, often legionaries and bureaucrats who bonded over shared trials. Archaeological finds from London to Syria reveal Mithraea tucked beneath barracks and markets, their walls scrawled with votive graffiti, Sol Invictus, hear me, or Mithras, Savior, accept my offering. The bull's blood, symbolizing the Milky Way in Mithraic iconography, was believed to offer spiritual rebirth, a concept that directly rivaled Christian baptism. Yet the rivalry went deeper than symbolism. Both cults promised salvation, resurrection, and a cosmic battle between light and darkness. Mithra's birthday, December 25th, his title, Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, even his sacramental bread and wine, all paralleled Christian traditions with uncanny precision. Some scholars argue this was no coincidence but strategic syncretism. When Constantine converted to Christianity, his coin still bore Sol Invictus for years, a reluctant nod to Mithra's enduring grip on Roman hearts. The Tauroctonies' legacy lingers in the unlikeliest places. Early Christian art borrowed Mithraic poses for depictions of Christ as the Good Shepherd. The Vatican sits atop a suspected Mithraeum, leading conspiracy theorists to whisper of suppressed connections. But perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from Ostia Antiquae, where a Mithraeum's altar shows Mithras and Sol sharing a banquet beneath a sky frozen in bronze, a reminder that in the end, even gods must negotiate with the stars. What survives isn't just the image of a bull's death, but the ghost of a faith that once mapped the heavens onto stone, teaching its followers that to kill the beast was to unlock the sky. From the blood-stained altars of the Aztecs to the ecstatic whirl of the dervishes, these 30 sacred rituals reveal a truth as old as humanity itself. Our hunger to touch the divine is written in fire, bone, and song. Across continents and millennia, civilizations with no knowledge of each other arrived at the same profound realizations. That transcendence demands sacrifice, that the boundary between worlds is thinner than we dare believe, and that the most potent magic often lies in surrender. What's astonishing isn't just their diversity, whether it's the Zulu weaving ancestral voices into grass mats or the Druids harvesting mistletoe under a golden sickle, but their shared heartbeat. Each ritual, no matter how strange or severe, was a love letter to the unseen, a dare to stare into the abyss and find something staring back. Consider how these ceremonies shaped history. The Maya ballgame wasn't just sport, it was diplomacy, preventing wars through sacred competition. The Eleusinian mysteries united ancient Greece's greatest minds in a secret so potent it softened their fear of death. Even the controversial Santhara of the Jains whispers a radical alternative to modern medicine's obsession with prolonging life at all costs. These weren't fringe practices, they were the operating systems of entire cultures, dictating everything from harvest cycles to imperial expansion. The Inca's child sacrifices on Andean peaks were as vital to their cosmology as elections are to democracies today, yet their echoes persist in ways we rarely acknowledge. When Bali's Ungaban festival sends paper smartphones and designer handbags up in flames for the afterlife, it mirrors ancient Egypt's grave goods. Both affirm that the dead still crave modernity's comforts. The firewalkers of Japan and the Viking blót feast share a common thread: the belief that fire isn't just destructive but a purifying bridge between realms. Even our Halloween costumes and New Year's resolutions are distant cousins to the masks and vows of the Tungusic shamans or the Babylonian Akitu festival. The rituals changed costumes, but their bones remain. So here's the challenge these legends leave us with. If you could step into one of these ceremonies, not as a tourist but as a true participant, which would it be? Would you dare to let the drums of Vodou pull your spirit aside for a LWA to ride? Could you walk the glowing coals of Mount Fuji, trusting the kami to spare your feet? Or would you kneel in the shadow of a ziggurat, ready to become the vessel of a goddess? The real question isn't about the past, it's about what these rituals reveal in us. After all, every sacred act began because someone, somewhere, refused to accept that the mysteries end where the senses fail. And isn't that same defiance still alive in us today? Tell us in the comments, and if these whispers of the ancient world left you haunted, follow us deeper into the labyrinth. The past isn't done with you yet.